Hello. Welcome to another book video, and I actually have a confession to make, and that is that I didn't read a single book in the past 1.5 weeks of July because my parents and I went out to Wyoming to visit my brother and his fiance and his dogs, and it was super cute and it was really nice to get away, but we were so busy that I literally went to sleep at 9 p.m. every night and didn't read at all. Like, I just didn't have time. But despite that, I managed to read 9 books in the month of July, which is still quite a lot, especially since I didn't read at all during that time. So there is still a lot to talk about, and a lot of them were 4-star reads. So it was a really good reading month, and I am excited to just talk about those books with you today. The first book I read in July is a book called Maid by Nita Prose. This was actually sent to me by a dear friend, Angie, so thank you, Angie, for sharing it with me. I did really enjoy this. So this book follows a woman named Molly. She works as a maid at a super fancy hotel called the Regency Grand, and she is the best maid there by far. She actually cares about what she does, so she is the one who is plumping up the pillows to their perfect state. She is wiping down all of the counters, eliminating every speck of dust, lining up travelers' little travel-size containers of shampoo and makeup and stuff, by size accordingly, biggest to smallest, and she is on it and she is so good at what she does. But that also makes her a really good suspect in the case of a murder. So one day Molly is just doing her normal routine. She is cleaning the rooms assigned to her. She goes up into the VIP suite and she sees this really wealthy man named Mr. Black on the bed, and she's like, he's sleeping, I'll just clean around him. But it turns out she realizes that he is not sleeping, he's dead. So she calls the police and they take care of the body, but Molly quickly becomes the prime suspect, not only because she found the body in the first place, but also because she is a really good maid. She can clean up any evidence that is left behind, and she is neuroatypical, so a lot of the interactions that she has with other people don't come off the way that the other people expect them to. Molly doesn't react to certain situations in the same way that someone who is neurotypical might. So that causes a lot of suspicion on their end. And Molly just wants to work, she just wants to do her job and clean, but this investigation is impeding that, and as she is becoming a prime suspect, some of her coworkers are becoming enemies and out to really pin the entire ordeal on her, and others are looking to support her, and she realizes that she has friends and support systems in place that she didn't even know that she had. So this was a really fun take on the classic murder mystery, and it reminded me a lot of the board game Clue, where you have all of the players together in a sort of confined space. In this case, it's the hotel, and you don't really know who to trust, but everyone seems a little suspicious and there are different plots going on, and you have to figure out alongside Molly who is ultimately responsible for the death of the man whose name is Mr. Black. But yeah, it was a solid read, so I gave it 3 stars instead, closer to 3.5, just because of how much I enjoyed the way that Molly and the way that she thinks is integrated into the story and the plotline and the ultimate resolution. If you watched my video from last month, you will know that I went off on a tangent about the video game 13 Sentinels, and I'm gonna do it again. I'm very sorry. That video game references and integrates H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds really well throughout the plotline, and it does that because it's H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds is such a important piece of speculative fiction and sci-fi fantasy, so I wanted to reread it. I read it for the first time back in high school, I think, because I was really into aliens, and I still am, and I just wanted to see how it compared to when I first remembered reading it, because when I first read it, I remember just being meh about it. It didn't really bring a strong reaction about in me. So I wanted to revisit it because there was this new piece of media, 13 Sentinels, and I just wanted to see like what was working here and how was that carried over. So War of the Worlds is a classic sci-fi piece, and it follows this narrator who works as a philosopher professor, I think it is, and they live in England, and one day there are these shooting stars that come passing through the sky. All of the scientists are like, don't worry about it, like it's totally fine, they're gonna miss the Earth, like we don't even have to worry about them, it's all good. It's not all good because these shooting stars do land. One lands about 5 miles away from the narrator's home, and they quickly realize that it isn't a meteor, it's not a shooting star, it's not a hunk of rock, it's a capsule. And there's something in the capsule that is trying to come out. And what comes out is an alien. It is a Martian specifically, and these are not the green humanoid Martians that you may think of. These are like blob amoebas combined with octopuses. So they're brown, they're really gross and like squelchy, and they have a ton of tentacles that they use basically instead of arms and legs to move about and to manipulate with the world. And they don't have like facial features. I think they might just have eyes, maybe. I'll double check that for you. Obviously, as these Martians come down, there is terror among the people, specifically because these Martians are here on Earth to essentially take over the resources because Mars is dying and they need a new planet to have those resources and life force from. It really becomes a game of survival as these Martians with their high technology come in and really just try to put the humans in their place. I rated this book 5 stars. It was just that good. It really does stand the test of time, at least in my eyes. And I saw a Goodreads review where someone said something like, a lot of people read this book and they don't think there's anything special about it, but that is because this book laid the groundwork for almost every piece of sci-fi that has come after it, and that's why it doesn't seem as new, because everything that we have seen from that point has been based on that, and that just really speaks to how like good of a piece of fiction and media it is. And if you're interested in sci-fi, if you like aliens, if you are just into like questioning the nature of the world and like post-apocalyptic sort of things, but also that aren't super bleak, there's still hope throughout this. So I would suggest reading this book and then playing 13 Sentinels. The next book I read is one that was not nearly as good, and that is The Hike by Drew Margery. This basically follows a young, I guess he's more like mid-30s maybe, man named Ben. He is going on a business trip. He's at this sort of remote hotel in Pennsylvania, and he's kind of enjoying it. It's a brief break from his wife and his 3 kids, but it quickly takes a turn for the worse when he goes on a hike before the meeting and loses his way. He is chased by these big, beefy, like humanoid people, but with skinned Rottweilers over their faces, and this just sets off a chain of events that takes Ben from one nightmarish situation to the next. He is faced off with all manner of mythical creatures, and he learns that he is on this set path and he has to stay on the path, otherwise he will die and he will never make it home to his wife and his children. This was a book that I thought about putting down and not finishing, and I wish that I would have. I kept waiting for it to get better and it didn't. So Ben is a super, super annoying protagonist to be stuck with for over 200 pages. I mean, he's really annoying and entitled, and there are parts in the book where he's like, yes, like I know I'm just this like white man, but I have trauma too, and that's perfectly valid and true. But the novel didn't do anything to like support that claim or really call into question more like what trauma means and like how you can be like validated in that, and it was just kind of like a few one-off lines that didn't really make sense. It was like trying to appeal us to Ben and make us empathize with him, but it didn't really work for me. And the whole book is really just like a shallow movement from one crazy shocking scene to another, and the scenes don't have a lot of substance, and overall there's nothing really tying this together other than the fact that Ben has to stay on the path. And the path is kind of like this sense of, you know, your path in life, right? So you have to do these things in order to keep going and to continue staying alive, essentially. But it didn't. If something is like going to propose that idea to me, I need to know, like, why should I stay on the path other than the fact that I'm going to die if I go off of it? What are the reasonings behind that? Why is the path itself even something that exists, and why is it something that should be followed? Who defines those boundaries and those rules for us? So overall, I did not enjoy this book. I gave it 2 stars, and I had hopes for it because so many reviews said it was wacky and bizarre and surreal, and I love things like that. But if it's like to really be bizarre and weird, there has to be some sort of reasoning behind it. And you can't just throw a bunch of images and scenes together and be like, wow, what a shock, because it doesn't work. And if it is lacking that underlying substance, it's not going to make an impression the way something like Jeff Vandermeer's like Annihilation and Southern Reach series, like that's kind of like, he has a whole genre of like the weird and the bizarre, and this book felt like it was trying to do that, but it didn't even come close. So sorry to anyone who enjoyed that book. I kind of just went off on it, but I would not recommend it for anyone, even if it sounds interesting. There are better books out there. The next book I read is There Are Things I Can't Tell You by Iriko Mufumufu. This is a one-shot BL or boys love manga that follows 2 men in their mid to late 30s. Kasumi is really introverted. He's honestly been depressed his whole life. He works as a standard office worker. And then there's Kyosuke, who is more outgoing, and he works as a designer at a pretty large media firm. So the 2 of them have been friends since they were little, and Kyosuke has always known that he was gay, but because of his conservative father and the way that he was brought up, he feels that it's something wrong with him, and just not something that he wants to pursue or feels that he should not pursue. So whenever Kasumi confesses to him, he essentially rejects him and says that this isn't love, and it's really gutting. And Kyosuke's whole philosophy on life is that if he does the right thing at the right time, in the right place, he will propel his life forward and be reaching success and what that means for him. But there is an instance in which Kyosuke puts in the right effort at the right place at what he thinks is the right time, and it ends up not working out. And that calls into question for him his entire approach to life, and also, of course, his relationship with Kasumi as well. And what I really liked about this manga is that, first of all, it's dealing with adults who understand their past, and the way that it is shaping them in the present moment, but are still finding it difficult to act in a way that does not align with the way that they were brought up. I think that's so really hard, and something that people struggle with their entire lives, which is kind of like letting go of traumatic events from their childhood and not letting that impede the way that they're living their lives right now. And to see that, especially in context of queer men, was really good to see, I think, and the way that they're kind of, working through these issues. It's not going to be this really cute, like, oh, like, yay, they're in a relationship process. It's not super depressing either, but it's just like this reality of what people have to work through in order to find happiness and find love. And I really appreciated that I just read it at a time when I was like also going through stuff, so it was also just kind of nice to see someone asking the same questions I was, like, is this like the right thing to do? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing with my life? I think those are just age-old questions, and it was nice to see that integrated alongside with a romance. This is not a manga that's just focused on like the romance. They really felt like real characters. That's something that I don't get a sense of in a lot of other BL manga. It often feels like the characters are just like kind of vehicles for the romance, but in this case, like, we understand Kasumi and Kyosuke's past and how that is influencing the way they're acting now. So I really liked this. I gave it 4 stars. It is a one-shot, so just one volume. It's not a big investment, and it's childhood friends to lovers with smut, fluff, angst, so you really have everything in there if you want it. And yeah, if it sounds interesting, I would recommend you pick it up. Throughout the first half of the month, I was reading a book called Dear Memory by Victoria Chang. This is a collection of letters and essays in letters that Victoria Chang writes to people and concepts, and throughout them all she's exploring the connections between memory, grief, and language. So she has these letters, and then also throughout the book, interwoven with the letters are real documents from her childhood and her past, so like photos, notes from conversations with her parents, and things like that. And as she's kind of connecting these with the letters, she is really exploring her history and kind of re-seeking and shaping her history as she knew it and her sense of self now. So I really enjoyed this. Victoria Chang is kind of primarily known as a poet, but this is more, I guess, memoir and essay-y. I really like the epistolatory form as well, because letters are so intimate, but they're also very crafted at the same time. And it's just really interesting to see that, and the way that she would be writing to a person and then turn it around and like write to silence. And that was actually my favorite letter in the collection. But yeah, you can just kind of see that here's part of the letter, and then over here is a photo that she included, and she wrote on the sails, and she does things like that throughout the book. It's just a really beautiful book in terms of like the physicality of it too. It's hardcover, the pages are super glossy, and it just feels really luxurious and nice to sit with. I did wish though that the visual elements were more incorporated into the language and into the letters themselves. I was expecting it to be kind of more along the lines of something like Ghosts of and that poetry collection, where you cannot separate the words from the images, and I was hoping that that would be sort of similar to this. So that was just a case of my expectations weren't aligned correctly, but I gave this 4 stars. I enjoyed it. It was a good way to start each day. I would read a letter or two, and it was just a nice way to ease myself into living, and like a good way to just start things off. The next book I read is Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. This is a YA novel set in contemporary Korea, set in Seoul, and it follows this young girl named Myung. She is half human, half kumiho or fox spirit, and in order to survive, she needs to feed on gi, or like life energy, and she decides that she will only take gi from creepy, like gross, horrible men, essentially. Queen. But one day there is an issue. She is out feeding and she comes across this goblin who is almost killing this young boy. He's not a young boy, he's like a teenager, sorry. But she steps in against her better judgment and saves the boy, but in doing so she loses her fox speed, which is like her soul essentially, and without it she will die. So Myung has to figure out how to correct course, how to get her fox speed back inside her body where it is nice and safe. But one thing she didn't count on is her growing feelings for the boy that she saved. I really enjoyed this book. It was so fun to read about Korean culture and mythology in a contemporary setting, and to see it really brought to life through Myung's eyes. And I really like the dynamic with Myung and Jihoon, who is the boy as well. While I was reading this, so Myung is half human, half fox. Her father was human, and her mother is the fox, where she gets all the fox from. So her mother is full fox spirit, and she's like described as really beautiful, but also really scary and powerful. And the whole time I was reading it, I couldn't stop thinking of her as Yae Miko from Genshin Impact. So that's like where my head was this entire time. But other than that, it was a really good time. I liked the way that Kat Cho wove so many elements of mythology throughout the story, and also the way she explored parent and child dynamics with Myung growing up as an only child with a single mother. It really explored the way that they rely on each other and love each other, but also the ways in which that they like harm each other, or kind of want the best for each other but don't go about it in the way that would maybe be the most comforting or satisfying for the other. So I like that ambiguity and the insistence that parent-child relationships aren't always simple and they aren't black and white, because that is really the case, and it was great to see that complexity brought into it. And it was also nice that this is a YA novel and it doesn't have a love triangle. So we just have one protagonist girl, one protagonist guy. That's really all we need. They have a cute little group of friends, but there's no unnecessary romance thrown in there just for the sake of it. So it was super cute overall. I gave it 4 stars, and there is a companion novel, which I am hoping to read next month, or this month, I guess. But I really enjoyed the characters, so I'm excited to jump back into this world. I also read a collection of poetry this month. It was Postcolonial Love Poem by Natalie Diaz. Diaz is a Mojave Native American poet, and in this collection she's talking a lot about, at least for me, this was my overall sense, bodies. The speaker's body, other people's bodies, animal bodies, bodies of water, all the ways that these are connected and the ways in which they collide, and through that collision shape each other and the world itself. As the name of the collection suggests, she's also challenging and questioning what a love poem can be, the forms that it can take, what it can look like, what it can talk about, and I thought that was really interesting too. A lot of the poems are super grounded and like sensual. They're just like very rooted in the body, and I like feel like I'm floating outside of my body at least 60% of the time. So reading this was really interesting to get that inside perspective on how this person is interacting with the world and moving through life, because it sounds very different from the way that I am, and it makes me kind of want to like get more of that connection, but I'm not sure how to. It took me months to finish this collection. I think it was just timing for me personally, because it was a really solid collection, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, then I would recommend that you pick it up. There were really some great poems in here, and the one, I forget what it's called, the name of it, but the speaker is driving up to someone's house and they're swinging their headlights over the front of the house, and they said the light's like a lasso around it, and it was just so beautiful if you're interested in poetry from like America West. So I think mostly around like Arizona areas, but kind of like that deserty, like western feel. It definitely has that too, and since I was just out there recently, at least in Wyoming, which is kind of on the west, at least in the Midwest, it really did kind of evoke those same feelings, but in a way that was much more beautiful and like imbued with feeling and emotion than like during my own experiences out there. So yeah, I would highly recommend this collection to pick up if you're interested. It's poetry, so I don't give a rating, just know that I liked it. I also read a graphic novel called Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe. This was originally a webtoon that was adapted into a physical graphic novel, and I saw a lot of people hyping this up, so I figured I would give it a try. It is basically a contemporary retelling of the Greek myth of Hades and Persephone, except instead of Hades kidnapping Persephone, they meet at a party, and it's kind of like love at first sight. They're into each other. It is like pretty cute. It has some cute scenes, but I don't really get the hype for this one, honestly. It's just a personal preference for me. I don't love the art style, though it did grow on me as I read. But also I found the paneling of the physical copy quite awkward or stilted. It didn't flow really well, and I think that's because it was adapted from a webtoon, but it's still something that really stuck out to me. And also, I didn't know going into this that there are some pretty big scenes with sexual assault and rape, so trigger warnings for those. I just wasn't expecting it, and it kind of like disrupted my reading experience of this one, just because I had no like knowledge that that was going to happen, because everyone is like, this is the best graphic novel webtoon I've ever read, and no mention of that anywhere. So yeah, I just want to let you know, if you decide to pick it up, that that is in there, so be warned. Yeah, I didn't love this one. I didn't hate it, but I just didn't understand everyone's love for it. So I gave it 3 stars, but I'm thinking it's probably closer to a 2 at this point. I will not continue reading the story. It just didn't really grab my attention in the way that I thought I would. I thought it would, because I do love Greek mythology and retellings, but this one just wasn't for me. So yeah, better luck next time. The last book I read this month is one that I feel just descended from the skies, like at the perfect time. So I was at Barnes & Noble just browsing, as one does, and I was just looking at the shelves, and I saw the author Meiko Kawakami. She's been on my list to check out. She's a Japanese author, and I've heard of her other books, but I hadn't heard of this one, and this was the one that sounded the most intriguing to me. It's called All the Lovers in the Night, and I picked it up, I read the blurb, I read the first page, and I was like practically crying, because everything in the blurb that was described about the protagonist was like things that I was going through at the same time, / kind of still am, and I was just like, wow, this is serendipity at its finest, and I bought the book and read it. Very happy I did. So this follows a woman in her early 30s. I think her name is Fuyuko Iri. She works as a freelance copy editor. Her job is to find mistakes in books so that the editors and the author can fix them before the book is published. She lives at home, she works at home, she doesn't really talk to anyone except for her manager, a woman named Hijiri, who is like kind of the exact opposite of Fuyuko. So Fuyuko doesn't really have a life that other people would envy or find interesting or enviable and exciting, but she doesn't mind. She's just living her life until one day she is walking down the street and she sees her reflection, and she sees how just like kind of haggard she looks, and she can't really reconcile who she is with the person that she's seeing in the mirror, and she decides, okay, I have to change. I have to like change my life. I have to take some sort of action for once, like make something happen for myself. So with liberal amounts of alcohol, trigger warnings for alcoholism, like being totally serious, she goes to the local community center, and she decides to sign up for a class, learn something new. She isn't able to, but instead she meets someone named Mitsutsuka. He is a high school physics teacher, and the two of them just hit it off. They sort of start talking, and I say hit it off, I mean they having like a very awkward, stilted conversation, but they are clearly both interested in each other. So some time passes and they continue to meet up. They're making these sort of awkward, tentative steps towards each other, but towards the end they're also drifting back apart. But yeah, this book just kind of feels like having your adult crisis, like not quite your midlife crisis, but like your late 20s to mid-30s crisis, which is where I'm at right now, and being like, what have I ever done, really? What have I achieved? What have I accomplished? What does that mean? Like, what do I want that to mean? And like, I've never like made a choice in my life, so how do I change my life now when I'm older than I really should be when I'm supposed to be making these decisions? So yeah, I just thought this was a really relatable book. Fuyuko is one of those protagonists that it was almost uncomfortable for me to read sometimes because I felt so similarly to her, and she's not portrayed poorly, but she's not portrayed greatly either. She's just a normal woman. But yeah, reading that was kind of like a surreal experience of reading myself, if that makes any sense. So yeah, this was just an instance of a book happening and coming into my life at a time when I really needed it, so I'm very thankful for that. I gave this 4 stars because I really enjoyed it, but it did lose me a little bit in the middle, which is why I'm not giving it 5 stars. So I mentioned alcoholism. That plays a major role in the middle of the book, and there is also, again, trigger warnings for sexual assault and rape, so just be aware of those going into the book. I just want to let you know because I didn't know, and it's always like a nasty little surprise. But yeah, so other than that, I really enjoyed the book, and I mean, those elements were in there for a reason, so it made sense that they were there, and obviously are real things that people go through that need to be discussed in literature. But yeah, I just can't believe that I happened upon this book when I did, and it's just great. So yeah, if you're interested, definitely pick this up, and I know that she has more famous books out there that have been translated into English, so I will definitely be checking those ones out next. Okay, that is everything I read during the month of July. I hope I was coherent. I can never really tell if I'm making the most sense, but thank you for sticking around, thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time.